Go ahead and get started, folks. So welcome to the April edition of the VLab Forum. This is Steve Smith, VLab Director, and I'm joined here in the VLab Forum studios in beautiful downtown Silver Spring, Maryland, by John Chattel, our Technical Production Manager. Today, we're fortunate to have Jared Allen of the Forecast Office in Cheyenne, Wyoming, who's going to present a talk called Flood, Storm, and Wildfire-SAFER, and AGOL application suite enhancing hyperlocal awareness for NWS core partners and the public. So this is sort of another in our more recent series on IDSS tools that are being prototyped and tested and used in the Weather Service and elsewhere. I'll remind everyone that our format is approximately 30 minutes of content that Jared's going to provide, and then we have a QA portion for the remainder of the hour. We invite you to use the webinar raise your hand feature to ask a question of Jared. We'll unmute you and you can pose that question to him directly. Or you can also use the chat feature in the GoToWebinar to type in your question, in which case we will relay it to Jared on your behalf. Also a reminder that these sessions are recorded and we will upload the recording to our YouTube channel shortly afterward. You can share that with your colleagues as you see fit. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jared and take it away.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this VLab forum regarding flood, storm, and wildfire-SAFER. SAFER, as you can see up there at the top, stands for Situational Awareness for Emergency Response. It's a GIS, ArcGIS online application, or AGOL application, that is kind of split up into several different hazard dashboards and hazard sections where you have flooding, flash flooding, river flooding, also convective storm hazards that you kind of see there in the bottom left, and then also wildfire hazards. So not only do you have the wildfire itself that can be very significantly impactful, you can have some even light to moderate rain that happens to cross that burn scar after the fact, and then have some very significant debris flow and flash flooding across that burn scar and impacted area. So a little bit of background on SAFER. It kind of started back whenever I was in Jackson, Mississippi office, where there is some really significant Mississippi River flooding, and right along the Pearl River, which is a pretty significant river that flows right through the city of Jackson. And I'll have to give due credit to the WCM there at the time, Steve Wilkinson, who's now the MIC out in Greenville, Spartanburg, for kind of posing the initial question of, if this river reaches X amount of feet, how do we know what the impacts are? What are the impacts across the landscape? What businesses are going to be impacted? What transportation corridors are going to be impacted? And that's kind of where it all started. So if you kind of look there in the top left, we very recently had very significant river flooding across Nebraska, and especially Omaha area, where the Offutt Air Force Base had to close down. The Omaha office itself had to shut down and relocate over there to Hastings due to a levee failure in and around there. So a couple hypothetical questions. What if we had the capability, Weather Service-wise, to be able to map these river flood extents prior to these big floods? Or what if we could get within reasonable accuracy, 70, 80, 90% plus of these river flood extents for not only internal awareness, but external awareness? How can we partner with emergency managers and building a weather-ready nation with our ambassadors with these types of river flood extents? Well, if obviously that is a geographical extent issue and problem, then we can solve that using a GIS application, and especially one that's online, where we can bridge the gap from what we see at the Weather Service, and then what we can then brief and talk to emergency managers about. So you kind of see those emblems in the top left of each corner. Those are kind of the icons for Flood SAFER. So you see that green one up there. Down below, you see the purple one for Storm SAFER, where we have some pretty significant storms ongoing this morning across the southeast. So we'll take a look at those here in a moment. But talking about convective weather, before you reach that moment of what you see there in that satellite loop of very significant severe weather occurring, say, across Nebraska and Iowa from last year, how can we message that better across the emergency manager and weather ready nation spectrum? So we, in the central region at least, and I know in southern region when I was there, we'd send out emails, heads up emails, do webinar briefings, of course. You have your situational reports whenever certain thresholds or trigger charts are met. And that's a great way to get information out, for sure. But what if we could also just build a dynamic display that automatically updates that then we could also use in a briefing itself if we need to for a webinar or for a join me occasion. So that can be another reason to kind of build out a safer potential application. And then kind of moving to the wildfire, where you have maybe a significant rainfall over top of a burn scar. Which locations across that burn scar are going to be the more vulnerable locations of debris flows or flash flooding? And that is kind of being explored right now in Western region, and we'll show some examples of that. So really quick before I move on, special thanks again to Steve and John for setting this up and for the invitation to be here on the VLab Forum. Further on, a lot of Southern region folks really helped support this project from the Jackson office to where then I was in the Austin, San Antonio, Texas office, especially in the flood, river flood realm with JJ Brost, Jason Johnson, Paul McKee, and then the GIS admin coordinator, pretty much almost for the entire weather service, Jack Settlemeyer, down there in the Southern region headquarters. Also, my previous supervisor, well, current supervisor, Jeff Garman, and previous supervisors that I've had there again, especially Alan Gerard and Steve Wilkinson and Jackson, kind of where the inception of this project started. Also to Chris Lander, who's at the West Gulf RFC for his expertise in some of the river flood extent methodology and science that we'll kind of show a little bit later. Also to the GIS teams that I've worked with over the years. It's certainly not just a one-person project whatsoever. And the IDSS teams too. So lots of thanks to the Jackson, Mississippi, San Antonio offices, and especially now here in the Cheyenne office. So we'll kind of let that text fade away and kind of look at this background for a split second, where we see a lot of blue ocean. Whenever I was in Southern region, I had the privilege of being in the Southern region BLAST program, Building Leaders for a Solid Tomorrow program, kind of their leadership program. And during one module, training module, we received an article about red oceans and blue oceans. And the red oceans and blue oceans is a kind of more of a business construct, a little bit outside the government construct, kind of in the private market construct. And we're going to just take a quick look at this schematic here that's adopted from the Blue Ocean Strategy from Harvard Business Review, where we have products and services there on the left. And then we have markets and customers there on the bottom on your x-axis. So when you have existing products and services and you have existing markets and customers, you're kind of in a red ocean, a very competitive ocean where you're kind of defending your own territory pretty much. But if you're able to produce a new service or a new product, then you can kind of move and innovate into a blue ocean where the competition is less, or where you can kind of gain a new area in location of IDSS whenever you kind of relate it to the weather service. So in the private company realm, you can think of a red ocean right now, you know, smartphones, pretty saturated market. What about if you went back to 2000, 2005? Smartphones were a very significant blue ocean. And then that begot the whole app and application revolution, where you got new markets, new customers, new products, new services, and you moved into a whole new realm where you have new markets and customers and products that created those apps, you know, like Tesla, SpaceX, very pushing the frontier when it comes to these blue oceans. Well, how in the weather service can we find those blue oceans as well? So in the watch and warning paradigm, we're kind of locked into a relative amount of what we can do with those. However, you got HAZSIMP that's kind of trying to help simplify things, and that can help actually bring in new markets and new customers by simplifying things and making it easier for people to understand. How about new products and services? Here in Cheyenne, we've started to do snow squall warnings. So that's a new product and service where we kind of moved into a blue ocean of that realm. So kind of expanding beyond that, ArcGIS Online, or AGOL, especially now that we have a Esri account, enterprise license agreement account across the entire NOAA and National Weather Service spectrum, then these oceans have really opened up to us and can really be utilized and taken advantage of. So that red ocean is kind of a defend current position perspective, whereas if we are kind of moving into that innovative and pursuing new opportunities perspective of the blue oceans, that's kind of what the AGOL IDSS realm is with SAFER. So looking at the context of the Weather Service itself, what are some red ocean areas, and then what are some blue ocean areas that can be opened up? I kind of mentioned warning and watch services. There's some small things that we can do to warnings, you know, through WarnGen or through HAZSIMP, or some projects and programs that are looking at those. But overall, they're kind of locked into what we do, which is great, because then we have a unified message and we get the proper message out to who needs to hear it. Social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, we're kind of locked into those. Well, of course, the content, though, can change over time, too. So finding the right content on those channels can help open it up. NWS web pages, we're kind of locked in a bit to how those are designed and what can be put up and how they can be formatted in certain areas. NWS routine text products, and weather model output as well, where they can only kind of do so much testing and so much tweaking every so often and kind of see how things go and progress with all of those different tweaks. So what are some possible blue ocean areas, especially in the realm of SAFER and GIS? So you can look into the IDSS GIS AGOL services, river flooding GIS output, just like what happened over in Nebraska, post-wildfire flash flood and debris flow vulnerability. If you have a heavy rain moving over that burn scar, which locations across a geographical landscape are going to have the higher vulnerability and susceptibility to being impacted by debris flows and flash flooding? We can look at that and try to look at that on a map and then message that to the public, message that to the emergency managers. And then how can we kind of build a tool, an innovative, adaptable, flexible tool that really helps us internally, not only, but then we can communicate using that same bridge to emergency management services by being integrated. So if you're able to use and utilize these things on the blue ocean side, then that can actually translate to opening up the other side and becoming more of a blue ocean aspect as well. So here are just a few examples of some ArcGIS online story maps that are already being used by federal entities. So the large federal umbrella of FEMA uses this as a hurricane incident journal. So there's no cone, obviously, right now for a threatening hurricane or tropical system. But whenever there is, this automatically updates and helps them move their resources around, and also helps other government entities from the state level to the local level. FEMA regions are also using this as well. So here's an example from FEMA Region 7 up there towards Nebraska. I know FEMA Region 4 down there in the Texas area does this as well. Then they also focus on wildfire. So here's an example from the Camp wildfire that happened in north central California last year, where you can get this GIS display and these metrics over there with the numbers you see on the right to help make actionable choices and decisions. Cal OES, California Office of Emergency Management, and their office there also heavily uses this. For anyone that's been out to Cal OES, their state EOC, they have a massive wall of screens that basically displays nothing but GIS, ArcGIS information just like this. Here's an example that I put together whenever I was down in the Austin, San Antonio area whenever Hurricane Harvey made landfall. And there was going to be some very significant river flooding along the lower Colorado River. And there was a an emergency manager from Fayette County, Texas, and was really concerned about the town of LaGrange within her county about what is a potential ensemble perspective of what the impacts could be across the city. So we put that together for her, and it turned out to be very well received and worked out very well in her favor on evacuating a lot of people and putting out a code red alert. In addition for here, now we're kind of starting go from the large scale down to the smaller scale of this project, where here in the Cheyenne area and CWA County Warning Area, there's Albany County, which is the county just to the west of of Laramie County, where Cheyenne is located. And they have this electronic ICS, or Incident Command System website. And within this Incident Command website, they have linked our Wyoming Safer Hazard Dashboard in there. And feedback from that emergency manager has been really positive, where she uses this excessively to brief herself each day or each week on the upcoming or potential hazards that could occur. So the big question is how can the NWS launch into this GIS IDSS blue ocean? And really the answer to that is just trying to utilize the AGOL tools and resources that we have available already to us with that NOAA Enterprise License Agreement. However, we need, as we move forward, to make sure that we don't get in our own way. We need to make sure that the policies that we put in place, or do eventually get put in place, don't hurt us or hinder us from this GIS blue ocean being a sandbox of testing and experimenting, so that we can find the right and perfect ways to perfectly message what we need to emergency managers. So going back to the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo programs, there were some setbacks that occurred. There might be some failures as we initially launched this, but those failures will inevitably lead to high successes, as we've seen of late, and especially with the massive innovation of SpaceX. So another way of answering that question too is to bridge innovative tools like SAFER and ArcGIS Online across not only within the internal portion of the Weather Service, but across the National Weather Service and Emergency Manager span, so that we are looking at the same thing that they're looking at, and we can have that clear communication channel open between the two entities. So of course that's going to be based on the science that we're all looking at, of course, but then that's going to really aid the messaging, where it's really key to those relationships that we form, that then ultimately dictates the proper and quick and mitigated response to where the impacts aren't nearly as high. And as I just mentioned, those connections and relationships are extremely key in forming that bridge across that span. So kind of moving a bit more into SAFER GIS DSS application suite, we have the Storm SAFER application, we have the Wildfire-SAFER application, and then we also have kind of the Flood SAFER application. And these have all kind of been wrapped up into one ArcGIS online tool known as the Wyoming Hazard Dashboard, or Wyoming Safer Hazard Dashboard. And it's Wyoming because that's where we are, and it's for the state, but these can be made for anywhere, for any state, for any region, for any geographical extent. If you wanted it for a county, you had the emergency manager for a specific county that was really interested in it and wanted it just for theirs, you could easily do that. If you wanted it for a region, you can easily do that too. If you wanted it for a FEMA region, I know we converse often with FEMA regions and do FEMA briefings from the rock level, from the central region rock level, and also from southern region. So that can be another aspect. So these three that you see here are kind of the main three that are the most mature at this particular point. I'm also working with the Boulder office, where they have put together a Winter SAFER page focused on winter impacts and hazards. More to come on the Heat SAFER page. And then all of these will really combine into what will eventually kind of become a Weather Ready Nation SAFER page, basically to provide Weather Service and the partners with the what, when, where, and how bad is it going to be. In addition, there are some folks in southern region that are working kind of on a tropics SAFER page as well. So overall, here's a snapshot of the different pages that kind of have been developed in this case, from the Wyoming SAFER page, from the storm, wildfire, flood. That Flood SAFER page that you see down there, fourth from the top, is a slightly different version. There are two different dashboard options in building these, and I'll show that here in just a minute. That Flood SAFER version you see there is actually the Texas version when I made it there. One thing to note of that one, it is in the way that that one was made, it uses a different operations dashboard application than the Wyoming SAFER application is. And the Flood SAFER one, Texas version, is much more mobile friendly. So if you use that one on a phone or say an iPad, it is much more mobile friendly. The Wyoming SAFER Hazard Dashboard, not quite as mobile friendly, but it works extremely well on a large display for situational awareness operations. So at this point, I'm actually going to jump out of the presentation real quick, and then we're going to take a quick look at how this is all kind of set up project-wise. So the first thing, if anyone is interested in pursuing ArcGIS online or interested in developing some SAFER simulated or similar aspects, then the first thing is to make sure you have an ArcGIS online account. So you can do that one of two ways. Generally, you have an individual one, or you will also be able to create an office account as well. If you don't have an office account, I recommend getting in touch with Jack Settlemeyer at Southern Region Headquarters, and he can definitely and quickly set you up. So here's kind of just what our account here looks like, where we just place all of our layers within the main home screen area, but then you kind of create your own folders. So your storm SAFER information from your shape files that you upload to your dashboard that you can go in and configure, to your base maps that kind of comprise the application, are all kind of located right here in one stop place. You can see the different folders over here on the left where you have Wildfire-SAFER, Weather Ready Nation SAFER, and like Wyoming SAFER. So it may seem quite a lot initially, but once you kind of get the idea of how to build a web map and you're bringing in layers and you're bringing in web map services and REST services that are out there, it comes together pretty quickly. So moving on, we actually have some pretty active weather across the southeast. So here's just an example of the Wyoming SAFER Hazard Dashboard. I've already kind of moved it down to the southeast, but it defaults over Wyoming and Colorado. We just switched it from the Flood SAFER tab being the first one, now to Storm SAFER being the first tab, obviously as we move into convective season here over the next couple months. So right here, I can almost do a briefing right from this particular slide if I were on a webinar, whether it's regional, statewide, or at the local level, where you have the moderate risk from South Central Virginia down through North Carolina, extending into South Carolina. You have some pretty significant amount of warnings out. You have a lot of flash flood warnings here across Georgia into, looks like the base of the Appalachians there just to the west of Greenville. You have some very significant amounts of severe thunderstorm warnings and tornado warnings. Wherever I move this map, it will have the count of how many warnings are in the actual area. So if I actually move the map way over here to the central United States, it's not within the extent, and everything in the list goes away and everything in the warning count goes away. So these are flexible and adaptable to anything extent-wise that you can see. So pretty active day with 11 severe thunderstorm warnings currently in effect across this extent area, 14 flash flood warnings, 3 tornado warnings. If I actually were to click on one of them over here in the list, I'll click on that, it will zoom into it, and then you can see which areas are being highlighted as well. So you can kind of see how it flashes, it gets the local cities, and then I can turn on and turn off some of these different layers. So if we wanted to turn off the weather outlook and just specifically look at the warnings themselves, you can easily do that. You can click on the warning, you can see which counties they're in effect for, and you'll get this pop up, and then you can actually click here for NWS watch and warning information, and then this will take you to the text of the actual warning itself. So moving on from there, we can go to the Flood SAFER page, which kind of where this all began on the river flooding aspect of things. I'll let this load up here real quick. But you have your legend over here on the left side, your main map extent here in the center, how many observed river flood category hydrographs, gauge points you have down here, your river flooding situation across the entire United States, where this is flexible, adaptable, and updates about every 3 minutes. If I were to zoom in on a certain area, these numbers in the bottom right will change as well for whatever's in the flood extent. So as we zoom into Wyoming, we don't really have too many significant issues, a couple out there in Idaho and up there in the northeast part of the state. So that will automatically change as well for whatever is occurring. If I were to click on one of these sites, you'll get the latest stage. You'll see what its action stage, minor, moderate, major. If you click over on these, you'll see what county is affecting, and then you actually see the latest hydrograph as well, which is pretty useful on a quick one-stop shop place. What's the latest 1 hour precipitation rate across the entire area? Not too much going on up here, but if I were to come over here to the southeast, and obviously you see the MRMS 1 hour precipitation. Same thing with the 3 hour, exactly the same thing, but for the 3 hours. So you see that really nice bright stripe there, actually. If you wanted to look at looping radar, you can embed web pages. So here's across Wyoming, Colorado, not too much going on here. So that in and of itself is kind of a dashboard. If you wanted to expand this to full screen, then you can just hit this right here, and then it expands to kind of the full screen. And say if you're on a webinar, or say you're on a Join Me, just like this, and you're doing a briefing, you can use this for your briefing tool. So moving on to Wildfire-SAFER. This one right here is thematically designed around wildfires. One, detection hotspots. You'll see a bunch of dots pop up here of old hotspots, at least that were detected initially by satellite. And then what are the latest fire perimeters, if there are any. There actually aren't any fires going on right now that are of significant size, so that's good. But when they do pop up, they will show up with these triangles, and you can kind of see where they would be located across the entire country. If you needed to draw on this map, you can easily draw on this map here. Say we're really concerned, actually in the day 2 fire weather outlook from SBC, they got a fire weather watch. And we're like, oh, we are really concerned about this area looking at tomorrow. You can kind of highlight that area. You can make it, a different color if you wanted to. If you wanted to switch base maps, you can easily switch base maps. And a neat thing too is that if you want to create a printout, a PDF printout of your map landscape, you can just hit print here. You'll see that it's trying to create a print down here. And then within about 15, 30 seconds, depending on your extent and how many layers you have, it will load up a PDF right there, and then you can share that with your partners, and they can share it to where they need to go to. But the one last thing that I want to highlight on this one is that I'll zoom in here towards our area where we had a pretty significant wildfire last year, and using the USGS modeling of debris flows and flash flooding potential based off where the high burn intensities occurred, you can then visualize internally in the office, which basins across that area are more or less vulnerable to debris flows and flash flooding. So if you have rain coming over top of this, which you have the MRMS layers within this layer as well, then you can use this in addition to AWIPS, of course, and some of the other NSSL flash products to then show which areas might be more or less susceptible to flash flooding, and then you can get more hyper-local as to which basins are going to be impacted. So I can click in here, and then I'd get the actual name of the basin that's going to be impacted. Or if I even wanted to zoom in a little bit further, you can actually see the National Hydrography data set actually pull up, and then you get these local names of creeks. So you can use these local names of creeks to then go into your flash flood warning. So you can get much more hyper-local and have a clearer channel of communication to that local emergency manager or to maybe the fire partners that are out there that might have some local assets in the area. So you have looping radar. You can loop it across the area. River levels and flood extents is another option. We have the USGS stream traces linked in here where you can do upstream and downstream traces, which is really nice to understand where the water is going to flow if you have river flooding ongoing. So just kind of zooming in here towards Wyoming and then doing a upstream trace of where the water comes from the North Platte River. You can just click that point right there and you can see that whole watershed, which is a really nice place. For emergency managers, they can take a quick look at our latest weather graphics, and then they can also access NWS Chat Live. So I've got signed in here across the Peachtree City office, the Jacksonville office, and then also the Columbia, South Carolina office. So you can jump in and see all of these weather hazards in one-stop place across the SAFER application, while also seeing the direct communication with the office if they have an NWS chat. So overall, that's the warning, that's the Wyoming hazard dashboard. For Storm SAFER itself, it's very similar. You saw what it looked like initially there in that first tab as this pulls up here. Basically, it's all the exact same. If you just want the convective nature of things, it will initially pull all the data in, but then looks at the extent of your map, and then it will disappear. So we have it centered over Southeast Wyoming and the Nebraska Panhandle for us. Same thing for the Wildfire-SAFER application. There's a couple more tabs that allow you to see like what's the latest wildfire details across the entire country from InstaWeb. What are the latest active wildfires, say, across our area? Or if you wanted to look at the big picture perspective, you can see where all the big wildfires are, and then what the latest burn scar GIS data is, excuse me. And then you can actually re-upload that back here. And here's an example of looking at the camp wildfire. I know one of the individuals at the Central Region ROC right now, Aviva Braun, was actually on this fire where she's an IMET, and she helped out very significantly in designing this application by using its usefulness out there as well and providing some good feedback on making it better for if IMETs are deployed out in the field, or especially local offices are using this if they have a significant wildfire going on. Just to show real quick the difference in the Texas version of the Flood-SAFER is that we actually did some river flood extent mapping there. So these locations that are these dark blue circles, you can click on them, and then you can click on this hydrograph, and this will actually pull you into a whole new series of ArcGIS online maps. And whenever you pull in there, and based off your river flood extent, you see the latest hydrograph, you see where you're looking within your lower bound and upper bound of your different flood stages, and then what your E19 flood impact statements are. So you can go from minor, moderate, major, to upwards of record flooding. And then you can, if you have pictures available, you can even include those as to what happened during a significant event. Last but not least, I think that really shows the great flexibility and power of ArcGIS Online is this kind of Weather Ready Nation hazard viewer that we've put together, where you can load in satellite imagery. Say if you need to show in a FEMA example, here's one that happened last year when things were quite active. If you have effective messaging that you're putting out, say you're doing briefing videos and you upload them to YouTube, you can put those briefing videos directly in here as well. So here's a briefing video from last year from Hurricane Lane. One thing I actually did this morning real fast is do an updated briefing. So everything else in this this ArcGIS Online application updates basically on its own. But all we have to do is just go in here and you can just change these main headlines. So today you have a moderate enhanced slight risk of severe storms from the mid-Atlantic. Where is that moderate risk? South Carolina to Central Virginia. Where is that excessive rainfall hazard? And then, for example, I kept in from last summer when I last touched this. So I haven't touched this since last summer, but everything just kind of pops up automatically for you, which is really nice as you see this really good trough and deep tropical connection moving up the eastern seaboard that's giving rise to all that severe weather and potential flash flooding. Say you have fire weather concerns, then you can put that information there as well. You know, what's the latest forecast? This is a graphic that just automatically pops in across the country. What's the national hazard map look like? You can see where all the tornado watches are, where the warnings are, where they have the flood watches, the flash flood watches, all the river flood warnings right there. If you wanted to include some model output, you totally can. That's an option. You know, what's the national radar look like? You can show that as well. As far as severe hazards, there's a really good service out there that also includes population. So however many tornado watches and warnings and severe watches and warnings you have, it also does population counts. So you can see how many warnings you have, what's the total population of those locations. Tornado population, you know, sitting at 60,000 right now. Severe thunderstorm warning population just sitting under 3 million people right now across all of those different polygons. You can look at the day one SPC outlook, from the outlook itself to the tornado risk to the wind risk, and I need to update the hail link that changed here recently. But you have a nice 4-panel outlook, you know, the day two, pretty easy, day three, and then you can also embed satellite information in here too. So from the geocolor to the meso ones, those are all options that you can take a look at. And whether you want to use it as a briefing tool, or the EM or the region, FEMA, whoever wants to use it, can utilize this as a quick tool. How about flooding? You got that slight risk there across most of the eastern seaboard. The flash flooding dashboard also got the population information. So you can see where your flash flood warnings are located, where all your watches are located, how many people you have in your watch. Of course, includes New York City, so that's a pretty significant number, upwards of 50 million people. What about information across the tropics? So if we have a threatening tropical cyclone, hurricane, whether it's across the Pacific, Atlantic, you can take a look at the latest tropical activity with the latest cones. It will pop up here. So all of this dynamically updates. And then you have the tropical day 2 outlook, from NHC. Wildfire information from SBC, and then what fire weather watches or warnings are in effect. And then you can include what's the local forecast. So this is from St. Louis, where the NWA meeting was from last year. And then you can look at, what's the latest weather stories as well. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of the paradigm of the National Weather Service aspect of where SAFER project is kind of going. To kind of isolate that a bit more, it just really helps with a hyper-local awareness for clearer communication. So you have this greater warning text specificity that can go in there based off your fire partners, your emergency manager, where you can see that landscape very clear. So here's an example where we used in our direct flash flood warning for the Badger Creek burn scar, where we put in those very localized creeks. And we actually did have a small debris flow that did occur on one of those creeks. How about directly with NWS chat? You can directly interface. Here's an example from last week whenever significant severe weather was occurring across Mississippi. It's all right in that one-stop place. Google Hangouts, or now Google Meet, that we're transferring to. You can actually share your screen and do a briefing from your screen that then maybe the emergency management agency that you're briefing can then put that large screen up on their main display. So here's an example of me doing that with the Austin, Texas EOC. Of course, you can use the direct output sometimes of these maps directly for social media. So that background image of showing the Badger Creek burn scar and where that precipitation occurred across that burn scar, that's MRMS data. Directly take a screenshot of that, pop it into a template that you have, and then pop that out into social media. As far as the overall architecture is concerned, the web application is made up of different web maps and can be made up of different applications. So it can get a little tricky here and there, but kind of once you get your feet wet into knowing what a web map does and then what a web application does and then how to embed them, it's not too bad at all. So for future reference, if anyone wants to check these out later, here are some links. And here are some additional content being developed across the entire weather service from the River Forecast Center, West Gulf, Atlanta, out there in the Oxnard office in California, and Morristown, Tennessee. There's a lot of great developers doing some really great things. So this blue ocean is being explored. Now we are just needing to kind of combine all of our efforts into a national and regional paradigm as we move forward, developing and sharing this information with emergency managers. So that other blue ocean that I'd mentioned, river flood extent maps, we can use a Army Corps of Engineer program that I have access to and I can share to anybody. Not a problem at all. There's a lot of other offices that have started to use it as well. We only need 3 models to operate, 3 files to operate the model. You can create a river flood extent with pretty reasonable accuracy of at least 70 to 95% plus accuracy across the landscape, produced in a matter of hours as you get more familiar with the methodology. We did a lot of testing across different sites, different geographical landscapes, and it turned out to work pretty well. In addition, you can use experimentally the height above nearest drainage method, where here in the Cheyenne office, we just participated in a large functional exercise with the Army National Guard of the state. And this is much more experimental and needs to be vetted a bit more, but certainly can be a useful tool, especially in the western United States. Some initial testing in Mississippi is not performed too well, so we're still looking at where it's more useful and less useful. You can create KMZ files and then use these in Google Earth as an example that you see right there. And as I mentioned, more testing is needed there in the central and east CONUS for these inundation areas if you need a quick idea of what the impacts could potentially be, this could be a internal use and kind of close to the vest with emergency manager type of discussion. Like, we have this capability, these are the possibilities, and maybe this is kind of a worst case scenario. And so I have instructions on how to utilize and create some of those too for anyone that's interested. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this has been a very team-centric and large-scale centric project where county emergency managers have been engaged, feedback's been sought out, regional offices have been involved in a few incidences as well, from large teams at a local office building these extents, to even having Dr. Gina Yasko take a look and providing some social science background as well. So here are some of the workflow information for anyone that's interested on how to build at least the Texas version of the SAFER GIS online web application. And then for those that perhaps might be interested in developing river flood extents, I have a workflow there as well that is currently being updated to version 2.8. So I hope to have that out shortly. And this is also an application. This falls kind of outside the National Weather Service inability, perhaps, of not being able to have an actual official app out there. But we can have apps like this out there that basically it's an active web page itself, really. And here is examples of what that app looks like on a mobile phone during Hurricane Harvey from last year. So here's an example of communicating it with emergency managers where they themselves create the extents. And whenever they have this ability to be able to do that, then that really is a force multiplier in making sure that they're fully aware of their vulnerabilities and how to fully help their public, especially in times of river flooding in this particular case in Williamson County, which is just north of Austin, Texas. Same thing for LaGrange, Texas during Hurricane Harvey, where we shared these two images and created some river flood extents during Hurricane Harvey that allowed them to have 100% evacuation, and it worked out extremely well with 0 high water rescues as the river reached actually well above, you see over here, well above 50 feet, where it crested at about 54 feet, which was a new record. So having all of this GIS information in one place, especially river flooding information, we can do this ahead of time, and hopefully ahead of time, and if not, maybe during it, but hopefully ahead of time, where you create these flood extent libraries at different river levels, where you have that preparation before, you have that planning before, so those key decision timelines can occur, communication of hazards occur, and then the people and resource allocation occur in a timely fashion. And then especially have response and recovery from the EOC, whether we're deployed there on site, perhaps, or if they are working their own incidents as well. In that picture on the bottom left, that's one of our county emergency managers at a planning meeting that I attended and went to, and this is us using the Wyoming SAFER Hazard Dashboard to isolate and find, based off his expertise, his local expertise of the problem areas. So we can take this to meetings, take this to planning occasions, and then come away with very significant information on how we can enhance our internal operations. So from a larger perspective, for the impact catalog from the Weather Service Evolved mission, there is actually 2 locations where a situational awareness dashboard is being looked at or called upon. SAFER can kind of help fill that void, or at least ArcGIS Online in and of itself can help fill that void as this further gets developed. These are the different offices that are engaged within this Evolve mission, where I've worked with Peachtree City and Houston, and Southern Region knows about this, and hopefully there in Central Region as well, we'll kind of start to build this out there also, working with the tropical fire weather and hydrology programs. So just to kind of wrap up here, obviously we need to have a successful launch of this possibility, whether it's SAFER, whether it's a dynamic of it, or there's elements of SAFER that then go into the GIS realm as we move into this new blue ocean IDSS GIS space. But we need to make sure that we are effective and that we stick that landing, basically. So where we had our initial hiccups during Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, and sometimes during the shuttle era, to now where at most of the time, SpaceX is being pretty successful at landing things. So there's some regional development and organization ongoing in the GIS realm, where we can develop some base templates. And then very similar to the social media savvy and the MOS teams that have occurred, there's going to be kind of a mutual aid GIS team that's starting to get its foundation right now. So the region will help with kind of creating these severe weather hazard impacts, tropical, more so for southern region, river flooding impacts, and perhaps even wildfire impacts. So with that, I apologize I went a little bit long, but if anyone has any questions or wants to talk a little bit more about how to put an application together, I would love to talk about it. And thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jared. You can take a breath there. We do have time for some questions. So if anyone would like to ask one, please use the raise your hand feature and we will unmute you. I'm going to go first though. So Jared, what is the cost of this, if there is a cost, I guess, a direct cost for using this technology in this application?
Outside of what NOAA itself has already paid for the enterprise license agreement, cost to an individual or to an office or to a region is zero.
Okay, so this is, we're leveraging the enterprise license to do this. Second question is, this is available to on the public internet to anyone, or is it restricted somehow to the core partners?
So initially, whenever you're building, say, a map, we develop anything on ArcGIS Online through the NOAA Enterprise License Agreement account, or your own office, you're under that umbrella. Initially, it's going to be restricted. Initially, it's going to be to you only, and then you can actually share it on your own, initially just you, to NOAA. So anyone within NOAA, anyone with a NOAA CAT card, log in, can see that. The next barrier there is then moving it into the public domain. To move it into the public domain, you need to make sure that you have high level descriptions for your maps. You have high levels of descriptions for your applications of, what it is, a really nice screenshot of what it looks like that makes it appealing. And then also the one other thing you mostly need to make sure of is that the information you present on your application or web map is also or potentially can be located as another service already out there on some weather service webpage or NOAA webpage, or the data in some way is already being farmed out there. So once you kind of cross all those T's and dotted I's, you'll submit a ticket pretty much to make it public to the ArcGIS Online administrators for the weather service, and then they will make it fully public.
Okay, thanks. But it goes basically from internal NOAA to fully public. There's no way to restrict it to the, like core partners. It's either or.
Yes, I guess in a way though, if you want, you can only share the link with your core partners, but the only way that your core partners, unfortunately, would be able to access it is it has to be public. But then you can only share the link with them and not post it on any other public-facing location.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to the question. So Wendy Marie Thomas, we'll unmute her. Go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, am I unmuted? It just.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Jared, thanks for the presentation here, and a lot of work has gone into that. So kudos to you guys. Similar to some of those questions that Steve just asked, I wanted to ask: how are you testing this in terms of its effectiveness? Are you testing it for also like forecaster workload and how it's helping them, or is it adding more? Are you doing those kinds of data points?
Yes, in the past, I've had a emergency manager focus group come to the office. This is when I was in the San Antonio office, where we presented them a scenario, a river flood, flash flooding scenario, and you use this set of tools that's out there currently, the kind of the generic standard AHAPS pages, and then we then said, okay, how about you use this, and then what do you prefer, and how do you like it? And they vastly preferred the SAFER setup and paradigm, especially with the river flood extent aspect, and then knowing how they could do it. So we did take their perspective into account. We had a visiting scientist at the San Antonio office too, Dr. Gina Yasko, who is one of our social scientists for NOAA and the Weather Service, and she provided some really good feedback on how to design it and trying to make it as clear as possible. In some of my recent meetings here in the Cheyenne CWA area, I've gotten nothing but positive feedback generally from a state level and our emergency manager representatives. As far as the workload though, most of everything that you just saw within the context of the SAFER applications, they automatically update. It's a dynamic web map services that just ingest the data. So outside of maybe changing those headlines on the Weather Ready Nation SAFER for today, that took 3 minutes or so, 2 minutes, if that.
Sure, but there's some upline, sorry to interrupt, but in the interest of time, there's some upline factors like obviously knowing how to navigate these pages, but then too, for the forecasters to actually send it out to their, where we talked about their core and the deep partners. Is it easier than current applications? I would assume kind of a yes, but it would be good to have some data points.
Oh, I agree. Some additional investigation would be good. But if you were able to set up a webinar, very similar to this, and you're doing a briefing, the time saved from what you would have to put together in a PowerPoint or building PowerPoint graphics would be relatively significant.
True. My last question, I'm sure there are other hands up and I can't see, but have you engaged with NSSL and the Operations Center on this tool?
Yes, in some degrees I've worked with Dr. J.J. Gruley there and some of his NSSL folks where they produced some really good web map services as part of this for especially Wildfire-SAFER. And they really like how their tool and their layers are being incorporated into it.
Okay, good to know. So I'll stand by for now. I'll be in touch with you and Steve on email. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go to Ken Johnson.
Hi, Stephen. Is it Jared I'm speaking to?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I appreciate your presentation. Nicely done. I've got about 3 questions that hopefully we can get through quickly, but I need to preface my questions with the fact that I apologize. I got into your presentation about 10 minutes late, so you may have covered this. And then secondly, I've never seen this application or used it till a couple of minutes ago. I went out to Google, I Googled SAFER Hazard Dashboard, saw a link to the Wyoming SAFER Hazard Dashboard, clicked on it, and I have it up on my screen here, and I'm looking at, I'm with the Eastern Region headquarters, so I'm looking at what's going on in the Carolinas right now, and I'm seeing some interesting stuff. And so my questions are, I'm seeing Wyoming SAFER Hazard Dashboard there. Would every office need to do this, or could there be a single Weather Service SAFER Hazard Dashboard maybe maintained by the National Operations Center where everybody could hook into that? Would that make sense? I'm just wondering whether every office would need to do this, or what would be your vision as we move forward?
Great question. From a national's perspective, absolutely. A national SAFER paradigm can certainly be explored and maintained using kind of basically a copy of many of these web maps and applications. It kind of depends on how you want to message it with some of the core partners, per se. Like if you give them this tool and maybe they see it at a national scale and they're fine with it, and then having to zoom in to say Wyoming or to Texas or whichever state they may be in, it just kind of depends on how you market it and message it from there. But overall, in a nutshell, every office wouldn't have to, and you could create a national platform for this. Okay,
because the reason I ask is it came up centered on Wyoming, but I just scrolled and panned over to the East Coast, and there it was, all the numbers for warnings, watches, and so forth, just as if it was built for the East Coast.
Yes, it's adaptable and flexible to any location wherever you have that extent. So how we would like to move forward with it. Certainly could be at a national level for sure. Just kind of depends on how you, maybe a local office or a region wants to message it to their core partners and how it will be received from them. So I guess kind of to the point of the previous caller in question, that could be another data point to kind of see, will it be used as much or is it welcomed as much from a national scale, unless they see, oh, it's Wyoming, or oh, it's, Texas, or if it's Tennessee or New York.
Okay, and my other question is probably more a policy question. I noticed in one of your slides you listed the collaborations with some of the service programs at headquarters. I'm wondering what sort of activity has been done to try to move this through the Weather Service headquarters governance process. Dare I say cards. Having sat through the past couple of days headquarters quarterly program reviews, a couple of instances came up where things were developed in the field but had operations and maintenance tails, and there was no resources to support this kind of thing or the kind of project they were looking at, and questions about, well, what is the requirement and so forth. Has there been any work done to find a formal path to go, a formal R2O path for this?
At this particular point, no. I've worked with Victor Hom there at the headquarters in the hydrology program through some vetting of the science, but he's been my really only contact at national headquarters, and I've worked with several there at Southern Region headquarters too, where they're well aware of this project. But as far as moving it forward in a formal fashion, as you mentioned, cards, this has kind of been more of a grassroots campaign initially, prototype, kind of spreading it to different offices here and there to see how it works and functions for its spreadability, capability. And this is perhaps right here the beginning of that formal process.
Okay, thank you.
Ken, this is Steve and Jared. So Wendy Marie Thomas was on earlier. We do have the IDSS Management System Requirements Initiative in the PMO, in the Evolve, and they're working on requirements. And Jared had he's got this second to last slide that shows the impact catalog requirements that were vetted by the MDC. So in a sense, he's riding along, through that requirements process, and we may be able to just leverage that. It may not require another cards submission to move forward.
Right. I'm not suggesting that this should be mired in policy and procedure, because it looks like this potential, but at the same time, some of the things I heard in the QPR was that, for example, the national blend of models is not considered operational right now, even though it's got a major component to evolve in the PMO. And asking about requirements. So, I hate to get mired in process, and something like this looks like it has some real potential. And so I think I guess what I'm saying is, for any particular kind of project like this, we need to be thinking early in the process, early in the development, to try to map out an R2O path so that we're not catching people by surprise, and we're not having one portfolio or another saying, well, gee, I don't have resources to support that, once we have tens of offices using something, this or the blender or whatever. So, I guess my advice on this would start to be to map out an R2O process now and start to talk to whoever you're going to need to get buy-in on it to, if this proves to be something that should really be used throughout the Weather Service. And I think the VLab Forum is maybe one of the mechanisms whereby you help define that process. Right.
Thanks, Ken. And we're going to have to cut it off now. We're at the bottom of our hour, or top of the hour, whatever, and or the half hour. And so I want to thank Jared again for putting together really out of the box and impressive presentation. This session is recorded and we'll upload it to the VLab Forum website. You can share the YouTube video when it's up there. Jared's slides are also already up there, so you can take a look at them. I want to remind folks, coming up in May, on May 24th, we have Shad Keen, who's going to talk about NWS IDSS uses of Google Analytics. So another IDSS-related talk and another Google-related talk. In June, we've got probabilistic flash flood forecast using machine learning by Lee Carlaw. That should be quite interesting. And in July, Carrie Sheets is going to be here to talk about the NWS GIS viewer, another GIS talk. So I encourage you to put those on your calendar and join us in the following months. And with that, we'll sign off. Thanks again, Jared.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.